The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Familiar faces are lining up for what projects to be a tight Nanaimo race in the federal election. All 5 candidates from the 2021 election look set to run again for their respective parties. Incumbent MP Lisa Marie Barron of the NDP is looking to retain her seat. Runner-up from 2021, Tamara Kronis, is once again representing the Conservative Party. And former MP and current City Councillor Paul Manley has been announced as the Green Party candidate in the Nanaimo-Ladysmith Riding. Michelle Corfield is once again running for the Liberals, and Stephen Welton has been announced as the People's Party candidate. As of recording time, none of the candidates have been officially confirmed by Elections Canada. The nomination process closes April 7th, and a complete list of candidates will be available Wednesday, April 9th. To help tee off CHLY's coverage of the local campaign, I spoke with Michael McKenzie, political studies professor and Jaroslavsky Chair in Trust and Political Leadership at Vancouver Island University. Thank you very much for being here. We're here to talk, obviously, about the election in Nanaimo. It's an interesting situation because it looks like we're going to have all of the same candidates running locally as in the last election in 2021, but a lot has changed when you look at the riding here. What are your first thoughts?
Well, it's true that it's a lot has changed, and a lot has changed really in the last 2 months. And so we have seen the Liberal Party nationally come up in the polls, and this is making a difference in Nanaimo as well. It looks like the Liberal candidate's going to be more competitive than last time. And this is interesting because last time it was a 3-way race between the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Greens. This time, it's going to be a very close 4-way race between those parties. And there aren't too many ridings like that in the country where there's a genuine competitive 4-way race. So Nanaimo's really an interesting riding to watch.
First, past the post system, as you alluded to there in 2021, the winning candidate had less than 30% of the vote. How do you think a voter can navigate this system, this riding, when they're casting their vote, if they're worried about, like, will this even matter? What if I vote for the party who's in 4th place? How do you think the idea of strategic voting plays in here in Nanaimo?
Well, I think it plays into the calculation in a very direct way. I mean, winning a riding with 29% of the vote is something that's also remarkable. That doesn't happen too often. It only happens when there's at least a 3-way, and in this case, a 4-way race, that you can win a riding with 29% of the vote. And that doesn't give any party very much leeway. If you lose even a little bit of the vote and you're at 29, you're not going to win. And so all the voters have to think about, how much they want their party to win, how viable it is that their party might win, and how much they don't want another party to win. Because one of the features of our electoral system, which is called first past the post or single-member plurality, a single-member plurality system is one where there's one person elected in each district and they have to win a plurality. That's the most votes, not a majority. So in a single-member plurality system, you can help a party that you don't like win by voting for another party that's in 3rd or 4th place. And so people do have to think strategically. You have to think more about whether you want to support the party you really like or whether you want to prevent the party you really don't want to win from getting in.
How do you even do that? Like, how do you, on a riding to riding level, what kind of information could you use to get a sense?
I mean, that's another really good question. So one of the best sources of information about the riding by riding races in Canada is 338 Canada. And this is a very sophisticated website that uses an aggregation of polls, that is all the different polls that are available, to make projections about what's going to happen in each riding. So you can go find that. I think it's a very well constructed site. The people who work on it are careful and they do good statistical work. Now, they're just projections, and they have large margins of error because, whenever we're polling, there's only a few people from Nanaimo in each poll, right? So there are big margins of error there, but they do give you a sense of what might be happening in your riding, and that's going to give you a much better sense than you talking to your friends. Because the people are not a representative sample. That's true for all of us, right? So if you talk to your friends, you're going to get a sense of what your friends might do in the election, but you're not going to get a good sense of how the riding is going to vote. So that's the best source of information we have right now. And it's pretty good, but it's not perfect. In the provincial election, 338 predicted a very close race between the Conservatives in Nanaimo-Lantzville and the NDP. And the NDP won handily. So I'm not saying that they're wrong. They're just making projections with a margin of error. And that's the best we can do when we're looking at a single riding.
We've talked so far about how close you think the race is going to be, maybe some of the strategic considerations. What about what it's all actually about? What each of these parties might do to make my life different if they were in power here in Nanaimo?
Yeah, I mean, this is, what I actually care about, and I think what other voters care about. What are these parties going to do? What are their platforms? Why are they running? Why do they want to be in power? And sometimes we get the sense that politicians want power more than they want to do things with the power, and they want power more than they want good governance or good policy outcomes. And I think we should be thinking about the policies. And so there's another school of thought that says, you know what? Don't worry about what's happening in your riding. Just look at the parties, look at their platforms, and cast your vote appropriately. Vote for what you want, and that's the best way that we can collectively get good governance or governance that reflects what the voters want. And I think that there's a certain amount of wisdom in that. And so I feel conflicted. I think about what I want and I think about the strategic considerations, and I don't know what to do.
Well, we've made it several minutes into an interview about the 2025 Canadian federal election, and no one has said the word tariff. No one has said the word sovereignty. I'm not sure if that is a good or a bad thing. What do you think about the elephant in the room? How does that factor into our conversation today?
Well, I think it's huge. So we've seen this incredible rise in the polls for the Liberal Party federally. And this is almost unprecedented. That's a very quick change, and it's a dramatic change, and we have to look for explanations. And there are two explanations. One is, of course, Trudeau stepping down, and the numbers started to change after that. But they really started to change after Trump started making threats. So he threatens the tariffs, then he pulls them back, then he imposes some, then he pulls some back. And the threats or the tariffs rather, are a threat to our economy. Because they're a threat to our economy, they're a threat to our well-being. And then he goes further to threaten our sovereignty. And this has really completely changed the mentality of Canadians, and it has shifted our focus in this election. We care about housing, we care about healthcare, we care about toxic drugs on our streets, But now we really care about threats to our sovereignty and our economy and our well-being. Those are now the top issues, and the parties have to address that. There's no question. And what's really happened is that, you know, a lot of the conservative messaging up over the last 2 years has been very effective, but it's not going to be effective when it's tied to the style and politics of Trump and the Republicans in the United States right now. And we've seen the conservatives recognize this, and Poilievre has had to pivot in some respects. He has been using the tools and tactics of Trump. He's been calling his opponents names. He's been refusing to answer questions from journalists. He's had the tagline that Canada's broken. He stopped saying that, as far as I can see, because that's not going to play when we collectively are coming together to try and protect ourselves from a friend who has turned into a threat to our sovereignty. It's not going to play to say that Canada's broken.
You talked about how quickly things have changed from the pollsters' perspective and the atmosphere in the room. How much do you think there's still room for that to change in the course of the whole month we have, basically, until the election?
Oh my gosh. You know, elections matter. Election campaigns matter in Canada, elsewhere as well. A lot of the information, the political science on this shows that campaigns can really very dramatically change the vote. Things can happen. Leaders or even, you know, candidates that nobody's heard of can say something and get a lot of media attention, maybe make a gaffe, completely change the trajectory of the election campaign. And in Canada, the debates can often matter. In 1988, for example, the debate really changed the polling for the Liberals dramatically, and then it went back down again and the Conservatives won. But we see this big spike in support for the Liberals after the debate in 1988. And this matters in Canada because Canadians, although we tend to have preferences, we have party preferences for certain parties, we're not totally entrenched in those preferences usually. Most voters are not. And they will vote for the party if they like the leader, and they'll hesitate, and they might vote for somebody else if they don't like the leader, or if the party is saying something or promoting a policy they don't like. So that means our campaigns really matter. And so we're seeing these numbers right now. It looks like the Liberals in some polls are a little bit ahead. It looks like maybe they're neck and neck with the Conservatives. All that can change. And you've seen how quickly these things change in the last 2 months. We have a month to go, right? So it could change dramatically in any direction, I think.
Returning to here in Nanaimo, we've talked about how you feel there are 4 parties who have a legitimate shot at the riding. How much effort and energy do you think each of those parties nationally is going to put into maybe both here, the riding in Nanaimo, and Vancouver Island more generally?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the parties need to pay real attention to Vancouver Island, because it's not just Nanaimo that's competitive. Saanich, for example, and the Gulf Islands is competitive. That's Elizabeth May's riding. Elizabeth May has been a very effective leader for the Green Party. She has a high profile in the riding. She's liked by many voters in the riding. She is going to be very competitive, but she might not win. And the Conservatives could win that riding. The Liberals could win that riding. And so, the parties have an opportunity to pick up these districts. And there's 7 ridings federally on Vancouver Island, and that can make a difference. It looks like probably the North Island is gonna go Conservative. But even there, we don't know what the campaign has in store. And all of the parties have an interest in putting resources here. And I think you'll see that. I think you'll see the party leaders here. And the NDP, of course, has won seats federally on Vancouver Island in the last 3 elections. And it looks like they are in a tough fight in all of the districts on the island. So I think you're going to see their leader and their candidates really focusing on the island. If they could pick up as many as they did here last time, it would make a huge difference to the NDP. I don't think they will, but if they could, that's going to really improve their election results. So everybody's going to be focused on the island.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
We're kicking off CHLY's coverage of the federal election on today's program. All signs point to the local race featuring the same 5 candidates as in 2021. I'm speaking with Michael McKenzie on today's program. He's a political science professor at Vancouver Island University. Of the 4 parties we've spent a lot of time talking about, there's also the PPC running here in Nanaimo, the same candidate there as in the last round of elections. But of those 4 parties you feel have a real shot to win the riding, the NDP, who you were just talking about, they're the only one going into this campaign with the same leader as in 2021. How do you feel that plays into things?
Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah. As I said, Canadians really do vote for the leader. We vote for our parties. We have our preferences. And certainly, many people vote for their local candidate. Often people know the local candidate and respect that person. But the political science on this shows that what matters most is the leader of the party. And so I think you're right that the leadership dynamics for the other parties have really changed this election. I mean, I just don't think that you would see the Liberals in Nanaimo have a chance without this leadership change at the federal level. There's no question. But in terms of the NDP, I mean, I don't know. I think that Jagmeet Singh has been in some ways a very effective leader for the NDP, and in other ways he hasn't been able to move their numbers at all, and now they're going in the wrong direction. So I don't know if NDPers here are excited about going into another election with Singh as the leader. And so would that depress their vote a bit here? Maybe, if people are unhappy with the fact that he hasn't been able to increase the support for the NDP, even though they worked with the Liberals and got stuff done. Usually the smaller parties who are part of these sort of faux coalitions and support minority governments to get things done don't get the credit for those things, right? And that's what we're seeing in this case too. So are NDP voters in Nanaimo sort of not very excited about going into another election with Singh as their leader? Maybe. And that will dampen their vote prospects here.
I'm wondering also on that same subject, whether the different situation in the Green Party leadership. I mean, first of all, whether that was a significant factor in the 2021 election, and whether that will change in this election. Do you have any thoughts on that situation?
Yeah, so the situation is that the Green Party doesn't have one leader, they have 2. And I think Canadians find that a bit confusing. I do too. I'm not entirely sure why they're doing this. Elizabeth May has been a very effective leader for the party. She's been the most visible and prominent member of that party for its entire history. I mean, she is recognized as the face of the party. She's still very active. She's running again. It's unclear to me why you wouldn't just put her out in front. Now, having said that, Jonathan Pedno is the co-leader, and I've met him. He is a remarkable person. He's incredibly talented. He's very well spoken. He grew up in Quebec. He's fluent in French. He's fluent in English. He also speaks Norwegian. He's an incredible candidate for them. So I think they actually have, in some respects, a riches of leadership, that party. That's not what we normally hear in the media, because the Green Party's well behind the others, and so they get less attention. But both those leaders, Elizabeth May and Jonathan Pedno, have been very effective and are very effective. And I think they have a riches of leadership there. But I think it's confusing to Canadians, right? Like, who is the leader and why are they doing this? There hasn't been an explanation for why there's a co-leader. I mean, on some level, it seems, well, it's more collaborative, and that's potentially a good thing. But we just don't understand what that means. Imagine they were ahead in the polls. Who would be prime minister? We wouldn't know. So it's a strange strategic move, in my view. I don't quite understand it.
If I'm following along with the election campaign, and maybe there are things that I care about as a voter and I want to see the parties talk about them, how can I feel like I have some kind of agency beyond going out there and casting my vote?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you know, as a democratic theorist, I always think about agency and opportunities for participation. And most people, I think very rightly, feel like their vote is important, but not hugely influential. And that's true. But, you know, it's not really about your vote. Your vote matters, but it matters in conjunction with other people's votes. So the way we get things done in democracy is we get people together. We mobilize people to do one thing or another. And so if you're feeling like your vote doesn't matter much, you should focus on your vote and also work with other people to mobilize to vote in a particular way. And then you will see things that matter. And this, of course, is what the candidates do. And this is what the canvassers for the candidates help to do. And so, you know, if you're feeling like your vote as a single vote doesn't matter much, you can get involved in mobilizing people to vote in the way that you think we should be voting. And that's totally legitimate. It's an important part of democracy. And what that involves ultimately is persuasion. You try and persuade people. And if there's anything that we feel is lacking in our democracies, it's this opportunity to have public dialogue where people are open-minded enough to be persuaded. And actually, when you talk to people on one-on-one or in small groups, people generally are pretty open-minded. And so if you want to have a difference, make a difference rather, and you feel like your vote isn't powerful or influential enough, start getting involved in mobilizing and persuading others. And it could be working for a candidate. You can go around knocking on doors, but you could also, you know, just talk politics with people you know, and talk to people who you think might not agree with you, and that makes a difference too. So that is what democracy is about. It's not just about voting. It's about persuasion. And it's about mobilizing people who are like-minded in order to get things done.
Is there anything else you think it's important to highlight for people at the beginning of this campaign in Nanaimo?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we don't know what the party's positions are on all these policies yet. We're only a couple days into the campaign. There's been a kind of flurry of policies coming out from each party. In the early going, I'm a little bit concerned that the two main parties are trading policies and they don't look a lot different from each other. They will try and find ways to distinguish themselves, but, you know, Carney has got rid of the carbon tax. This was Poilievre's big policy. So that's put Poilievre in a difficult position, but it also means that the two parties look pretty similar on that. Carney rather is saying that he'll keep the industrial carbon tax. Poilievre says he isn't, but Poilievre hasn't explained what he would do to fight climate change. So there's some distinction there, but they're looking very similar to each other. And also on this new policy that they've been talking about, so eliminating the GST from the purchase of new houses. Both parties look very similar on that. Carney says, well, it's under $1 million and for first-time buyers, and Poilievre today is saying, well, he'll do it for 1.3 million, and I don't think he mentioned first-time buyers. So these are differences, but it's basically the same policy initiative. And on that policy initiative, I should point out that that's just on the purchase of newly built homes. It's not any home you're going to go and buy. Most people, most of the time, don't buy newly built homes. You pay on those homes that aren't newly built a property transfer tax, and the parties aren't talking about that. It's less than the GST, and so removing GST on newly built homes would make a difference to buyers. And in some cases, it can make a huge difference, but it's a policy that applies only to newly built homes. And that's not what the party leaders are saying, right? They'll say, oh, we're going to remove the GST on new homes. But when buyers think about a new home, you say, well, I bought a new home. It's 30 years old, So I think that Carney's approach to governing and to the United States and his style of politics is very different from Poilievre's, but I'm worried that the policies themselves are not that distinct.
Just one example of how much there is to watch for on every policy on every day of this campaign, and looking forward to doing it. Michael Mackenzie, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Michael Mackenzie is a professor of political science, and he's also the Jaroslavsky Chair in Trust and Political Leadership at Vancouver Island University. Election Day is April 28th. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Mid-Coast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Fruit is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Mid-Coast Morning.
This program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.